Hey everybody, it's Christy and Victoria again. We are here with Jim Anthony, and this session this afternoon, kind of in the same vein of our listing and sellers day, is going to be all about pricing strategies and tips when you guys have your appraisals on your listings. So without further ado, and just real quick, just so Jim knows as well, you guys are all muted. Of course, type in your questions in the chat pane and we will jump in and make sure that those questions get answered. And without further ado, Jim, I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Hi, everybody. I just want to congratulate you on taking this step. I think you've picked a fantastic industry to get involved in, and the future for you is just limitless. There's so much that you can do in this career, and you've picked an excellent company to affiliate yourself with. And so I just congratulate you on that. I thank you for having me today for this particular class and your overall training. And in the future, if you ever have questions or anything of any nature for that matter, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be glad to assist you in any way that I can. A little bit of background on me: I had started with the company back in 2007, and that was probably about the worst time that you could get into real estate. You know, the storm clouds were on the horizon, but at that point we just really didn't know how bad it was going to get with the recession, the Great Recession. And but it worked well because I had affiliated with such a strong company. I had all the resources, I had all the support, and that made all the difference in the world. And so when we're going through times like this right now, you'll find that the FC Tucker Company as your business partner is really a great choice for you. That first full year that I was in the business, I think I had 16 transactions, and then the next year I was in the low 20s, and then I was up in the high 20s the year after that. And then I got into 30-some transactions, and then by the time I got up to 43 transactions, I decided it was time to build a team. And even though none of what has happened to me has been something that I actually planned out, it's all been just sort of a journey that has taken me where I am today. And I'll always be grateful to everybody at Tucker that's been my mentors, support, advice. We have an amazing training department, so I'm just honored to be asked to do this particular class for you today. So let's go ahead and get started. We've got the slide here. I get to be comfortable on my couch. I love it when we can actually interact in person, so this is going to be a whole new experience for me, not getting to see you and to interact with you, but we'll make the best of it. Okay, let's go. Many of you, if you're local people, probably have seen this particular house before. 27,000 square feet, and probably one of the most unique monstrosities in our entire area here. For those of you that don't know much about the background on it, Jerry Hostetler was the builder of that, and when I started with the FC Tucker Company, there was a video that HGTV had come and done an interview of him, and he's out in his pool with a couple of ducks swimming around, and he throws a couple crackers at them, and then he eats a couple crackers, and it was just a very unique situation. There's an amazing story behind this house, but you know, a throne room with 2 staircases that go up to his throne, and a couple of kitchens, and rounded corners in every room, and chandeliers in every room. And so how do you comp out a property like that? And granted, this is an extreme, but where would you even start? This next house was a house up near Muncie. It was a sizable house that had been converted into a 16-bedroom bed and breakfast on 30 acres. And so how would you comp out a house like this? If somebody were interested in buying the bed and breakfast, maybe they don't need the 30 acres. Or if they would like the 30 acres, they may not need the bed and breakfast. And so this is another extreme challenge that you might get into on how would I comp out a property like this. Then this property here, my team had listed, it was in Franklin Township. Pretty much all the other houses in that particular neighborhood were in the high $400,000 range. But the folks that owned this house had also bought the lot next door and had really developed it with all of this that made it a great party house. But as you can see here, there's a saltwater pool, there's a cabana, there's a pergola leading to the cabana, there's a large koi pond with a fountain, there's a pizza stone or pizza oven area, there's a fire pit area, and so really they were hoping to get almost double what the prices were in that area. But how do you have that conversation with them that they've likely over improved their property, and that a person who could afford an $800,000 house isn't likely to want to buy a house in a $450,000 to $500,000 neighborhood? So how do you have those conversations with people so they have a realistic understanding of what their property is actually worth? And with the law of diminishing returns, all this investment that they put in that, they can't expect to get dollar for dollar that investment back, even though it was fabulous. And I think it ended up selling for a little over $600,000. Definitely now still the most expensive house in the neighborhood, but not anywhere near what they were hoping to get for it. Just a little bit of background here. Inspectors usually can get a couple of inspections done in a day's time, and they generally make about $1,000 a day. But an appraiser's job is much more intensive, and they usually only make about $450 a day. So there's not a lot of money coming into the appraiser's pocket for the amount of work that they have to do. Appraisers now have to have some form of a degree, a higher education degree. Then when they're getting their licensing, they have to have gone through 150 hours of appraiser education, 75 hours where they're supervised, and then they have to have actually devoted 2,000 hours over a 12-month period to the job. So it's not something where it can be part-time for them when they're getting into the business. They then have to complete the appraisal qualification board exam, which is a very intensive exam. And then throughout their career, when they're doing their assessments of value, they have to be in compliance with USPAP, which stands for the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, and also the ASB, the Appraisal Standards Board standards. And then actually Fannie Mae also has some guidelines that they have to be in compliance with as well. When we are talking about doing a CMA, we also have some guidelines that we have to be in compliance with. And I don't have any nifty handouts or anything for you that say adjust this amount for however many bedrooms, adjust this amount for however many bays in a garage, anything like that. But you will, over the course of time, start developing some kind of sheet like that yourself for maybe an area that you will specialize in. Maybe you've developed a niche area, like Kelly Huff, one of our agents, she specializes in just mid-century modern homes. So she's developed a really good resource for what are the appraisers making adjustments for with regard to those kinds of homes. Or maybe you focus on just a particular geographic area. We had an agent out in Avon that he would only do Avon properties, and he became an expert in that. There's no special formula for doing the calculations when you're making adjustments. It's just that you have to be able to use our technology and the resources we have available to us when you're making the valuations. There isn't necessarily a particular right answer when markets are changing like markets do. For example, down in the Fountain Square and that surrounding area around there, you know, there was a point in time where those particular houses, you'd be lucky to sell a house that you would just want to tear down for $20,000. And now a complete tear down house might be being sold for, say, $120,000. So, you know, there are differences that change based on location. Obviously, you've always heard the term location, location, location. But there, as we'll learn as we go through, there are other things that you'll be adjusting for as well. The experience and expertise that you'll develop over the course of your career will be helpful to you. There'll come a point in time where you are going on a listing appointment and you probably pretty much know off the back of your hand exactly what homes are selling for and what having one extra room compared to another house that doesn't. You may just know naturally what those adjustments might be. But in the meantime, it would just be good, especially as a new agent, to talk to the other people in your office, talk to other people who specialize in those areas and ask them. And then when you have appraisals, hold on to those appraisals. I have some that I hold back and go back to, especially downtown and some of those other areas where, you know, one street to the next, a house can be so different from a house just down the street from it. And so, like I said, utilize the experience and expertise of the agents around you, and just, you know, keep your eye on the market and really know the market. You would not expect an appraiser to come down and do a valuation in our area if they were from Chicago or from somewhere outside of our geographic area, because how otherwise would they understand the dynamics of particular areas of town? So you want to really know and understand the area that you're going to be doing evaluation in, so that you can show your competence in that area. A lot of people don't realize this, but when you're doing a CMA, there are actually requirements that you have to adhere to as an agent. Number one, you have to have actually physically inspected the property. Sometimes agents will go into a listing and maybe have some preliminary numbers to offer about the area. But I always tell my clients when I'm going in that I am going to treat this just like an appraiser would. I'm going to go in, I'm going to take notes, I'm going to take measurements. I'm going to then go back and do a full out analysis comparing apples to apples. And when I come back to you, I'm going to have a really comprehensive market analysis for you on not only the likely value of the property, but likely how quickly your house might sell. You have to be able to analyze the neighborhood the property is found in. So it's important to know about the neighborhoods. Earlier on in my career, one of the things I enjoyed doing was going on the Tuesday sales meeting tours, the tours that would follow sales meeting, and listening to some of the older agents who knew the houses that were built in there, knew who the builders were who built them. That was super helpful in getting a better overall understanding and really leveraging that wisdom and that information, that expertise that was already there right in my own office. You have to be able to localize the kinds of trends. We hear so much national trends, but we want to make sure that we always understand and communicate to our people that real estate is all local. So we want to understand the local and our regional trends more importantly than national trends. And then we have to include actual comparable properties that are truly similar to the subject property. So you don't want to necessarily compare a ranch to a two-level or a mid-century modern to a different kind of property. You want to try to stay within the same truly comparable property. And the reason behind that is that your buyers, if they're a buyer who's interested in a mid-century modern, then you want to really compare values to other mid-century moderns, because that buyer is only going to be interested in that type of home. Does that make sense? And then when you're doing a broker price opinion, and this is what you would usually be doing for somebody that needs sort of almost like an appraisal, it's just not as detailed as an appraisal, but definitely more detailed than a market analysis. Then you have to follow those same rules that appraisers have to follow. Any questions so far that are coming up, Christy? Okay, so
I did not see, oh, hang on, I just saw one come in. So someone had a question. So going on the BLC and using a CMA on that platform is not a true CMA unless you actually go to the property, or is that a BPO?
You really want to go to that property. You want to know everything about that property. For example, assessors are notoriously wrong on square footage. And an example of that, you could see a house that's really a story and a half, like a Cape Cod, and the assessor has given the exact same square footage to that second level that it did the first level. Well, you know, that can't be the case because of that hipped roof. It doesn't have the same square footage in there. Or the assessor may not realize that the basement is finished or that the attic has been finished. And so you really want to make note of all the different things that would add value to that property and how that would then compare to the other properties in the area that you're going to be using as your comps. Does that answer their question?
Yes, he said, okay, thank you.
Okay.
That was it.
All right. So Article 11 of the Code of Ethics, we all have to be in compliance with that. That is, we have to be knowledgeable about the type of property that's being valued. We have to have access to the information and the resources necessary to formulate an accurate opinion. So an example of that would be the Lafayette franchise that I'm involved with. If we had an agent in Lafayette who was wanting to have a listing here in Indianapolis, if they're not a member of my board, how are they going to really give a true, accurate assessment of value for that property? And vice versa. Maybe we've got an agent here that knows somebody up in Lafayette that's asked them to list their home up there. Yes, we are licensed to sell real estate in the entire state, but if we don't have access to the appropriate tools and resources, we may not be giving them a really good idea of value. And sometimes the people themselves don't understand what their value is. An example would be, we had some people that we sold a house to in 2016 on the east side. I think they had only spent about $103,000 on the house. It wasn't an expensive house. The other day they got a knock on their door with somebody that wanted to offer them $101,000 for their house. Well, she actually thought that sounded good because it was really close to what she had paid for it. But what she didn't realize is that between 2016 and now, her house is probably worth $135,000. She could have left tens of thousands of dollars on the table if she had just accepted that offer, because she didn't really have a good overall understanding of her value. Well, we know that it's likely worth $135,000 now because we work in this area. We have access to the MyBoar's MLS. We can pull up the comps. So it's so important that you really have access to those resources if you're going to be able to make a true assessment of the value for your client. And be familiar where the area, or with the area, pardon me, where the subject property is located. So that's important as well. There is a caveat to that, and that is if you don't have competence in one of those areas, if you at least disclose to the client that you don't have that. Like maybe you say, gosh, I'd love to list your house in Lafayette, but I don't have access to their MLS up there. If they say they're still okay with that, you can go ahead, but you likely need to get that acknowledgement from them that they still want to go forward in writing. Now, as an owner up there, I would say I would rather you split the listing with an agent there, or even do a referral so that you know they're really being served properly. But I wanted you to know that the Code of Ethics does make this allowance for at least disclosing to the client if you don't have competence in any of those particular 3 areas. And you will develop competence, you will develop knowledge and experience over time, but it's really important, especially now, to recognize when you don't have that competence, because you don't want to open yourself up for any kind of lawsuit or anything of that nature. have knowledge about this particular kind of property. Maybe somebody tells you, hey, we'd like for you to sell this barbershop. And you're thinking, well, you know, it's a commercial property, but it's just a barbershop, so maybe I'm okay with doing that. If you don't have knowledge about those things, maybe you don't realize that there's some zoning that might require a particular number of parking spaces or things of that nature. So it would be better for you to refer that property to a commercial agent and get a referral fee, or even maybe that commercial agent would partner with you so that you can sort of learn, but understand and recognize whether you have that competence and whether that would be a good decision for you to take that on. Another thing is only a small percentage of commercial properties are on my board. Most of them are using one of three really commercial databases for MLSs. CoStar being one of them. And so if you were only trying to give the likely value for that barbershop just off of a few commercial properties that are available in MyBor, you might be missing something really important to that value that would have been on one of those commercial sites. And then we've already really covered pretty well, I think, the geographical competence. You know, do you really understand downtown Indianapolis and that dynamic, or do you still want to go forward with you? And then you also need to identify that expert if you want to use one, like that commercial agent I mentioned. Note that they're a resource that you're utilizing in your actual report. Appraisers generally will make an average out of the comps that they have come up with, and we try to, as a realtor, stay away from just giving one particular dollar value and rather give a range. And it's easier to give a range also if you've got conditional issues. Maybe the house needs a little fixing up or something like that, and you offer a range and say, well, if you wanted to sell the house in its current condition, you're probably looking closer down to this portion of the price. But if you would do this or that project that I'm suggesting to you, and ask how they feel about that, and see buy-in from them on working with you to maximize their value that they can get. I like to do a range and then May doesn't actually limit on guidelines for the actual adjustments that you're going to make. It just simply says it can't be a flat dollar amount. A sheet, and we've had them around for to say every different number of bedrooms adjust $5,000, for every difference in the number of half baths adjust $2,500. You should not be doing that. This seems like an easy kind of resource to have, but it really should be based on the area. And like I said, Fannie Mae's guideline is it just can't be a flat amount. And if you can find comps that are truly comparable where it doesn't need an adjustment at all, that is the best kind of comp to actually get to use. So I would highly suggest that if you're going to use 3 or 4 listings and 3 or 4 solds when you're looking at value, that you make sure that at least those are the most close to your property before adding any others in addition to that. And then you should be able to validate your estimation of value. Your seller may ask you, well, why is my house not worth what I thought it was? And you may want to be more in depth with them. When I am looking at comps for houses in the neighborhood, I usually have printed out those sheets and I'm even making notes on them. And so then when I'm sitting down with the sellers and I ask them, would you like to look at my marketing report first, or would you like to look at my pricing report? Usually they always want to go with the pricing report first. As I'm going through it, I'm making mention on each one of those comps that we've used, details that I learned about that property. And a lot of times those details have come from me actually calling either the buyer agent that was involved in the transaction or the listing agent that was involved in that transaction to ask some questions and just help me have a better working knowledge of what was going on with those comps. Determining what's the highest and best use is a really important thing as well. There was actually a lawsuit with a member of my board that had sold a property, and within just a matter of a couple of months, that seller saw that the buyer had actually resold it for a significant amount more than what he had sold it for. And what he found out was that because of the zoning, his property had actually been worth a lot more. And so he was suing his listing agent for sold it. That listing agent have been able to determine, hey, and best use of this and what would to in terms of the principles is an arm's length. If you've got sold to her grand, maybe of the market in a deal to rely on it accessible to our tax record through NAR valuation models and realtor valuations. Public records are important, and sometimes you may be able to find FSBO by doing a tax in a different class. Give you an actually do that in your. I usually try to have and again try comp to the site. This and
Jim,
but appraiser
with you. Hey Jim, we're having some issues with your audio, and I'm sure if maybe you just need to be a little to the computer, having you call in.
Let's pull up.
I still.
Your audio is really skippy too, Chris.
All right. Mine is.
Help at all? Stop sharing the web. Is taking up too much.
Are you? Let's see here.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Why don't we
Did
try?
that help?
Yeah, that sounds a bit better to me. Why don't you try going like whatever you're doing now? Try that for a second. Yes, that's better.
Okay. Could if you absolutely. Christy, can you see?
Yeah, it's still cutting in and out. I'm going to have you try something else, Jim. Can you call in under the audio section? Can you call in on your phone? If you click on phone call, it should give you a number to dial. Let's try that. Sorry, guys. All right, are you dialed back in, Jim?
How's this?
Yeah, let's try it on your phone for a minute and see if that's any better. I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Can everybody else hear or?
Yeah, that sounds much better.
Okay. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So we covered about being able to look for different records, which a lot of those you can get through the MLS. Then looking for 3 actives, looking for 3 solds. And then we talked finally on that slide about the appraisers don't count the bedrooms and baths in a basement, even if it's a walkout basement, but they do count the square footage of that basement in their valuation. And when you are doing a relocation account, once you get onto the relocation team, the relocation companies also want it that way. They only want the count of the bedrooms and the baths on the main and upper level, not the basement level. The location, they should be in the same neighborhood unless they're very unique. And an example is that one of the penthouse condos at the Conrad Hotel, they actually went all the way to Cincinnati to get a comp. And you might think, my gosh, that's so far away. But they truly needed to find something that was of the same kind of configuration and a similar kind of building. And so that would be an example of something very unique where they actually would do something like that to comp it out. If you're in a dense area like condo communities, you want to usually try to stay within the same building or the same community. An example would be downtown at the athletic club. You likely would just comp out a unit in there with other units that have sold in the athletic club. And you might go outside of that, but it just depends if there's enough traffic there. That building, it has a particular kind of desirability to a particular kind of buyer, and so you would normally stay within that building. If you are looking at a particular subdivision, you generally want to try to stay within that same subdivision or within about a mile of it. But just be cautious that you don't have 2 different kind of communities within proximity to each other. An example, we had a listing in Noblesville one time where we were in a semi-custom and custom neighborhood, and right across the street was a vinyl village. Well, you definitely would look silly if you came to your seller and said, well, here are my comps, and you pulled in some vinyl village comps if you were trying to get a listing in the semi-custom and custom community. So again, understanding the subdivision, understanding the neighborhood, and trying to stay within that same subdivision is usually the best protocol to stay within. And then if you're looking at rural properties, try to stay within the same township border or even the same school district. And if you're nearly on the border of the township, you might draw a radius, maybe about 5 miles around that. But school districts, mass transit areas, industrial areas, those all have a significance when it comes to determining values. An example would be Bridgewater. Beautiful, beautiful community with a Carmel address, but it's got Westfield schools. So you would want to evaluate houses in Bridgewater based off of Westfield school area values. You wouldn't necessarily pull in more Carmel properties because you've got a different kind of person who would want to perhaps live there, a person that would determine whether they preferred Westfield schools over Carmel or vice versa. And then especially in this market where sales are happening so quickly, you want to try to stay within sales that have happened within the last 90 days. Now, of course, we're a seasonal kind of sales environment here in the Midwest. So if I was given this presentation in December or January, I would likely say, well, we want to really look at sales that happened in the peak season of the prior year as a forecast for what would likely happen this year. Of course, nobody could have predicted what's going on with the coronavirus, but we still have good sales activity out there, and I have not seen where it has affected prices at all. So I would suggest that that you would continue to look at comps that are reflective of the current really good sales activity and as a continuation of what happened the last peak season. If you are in a slower market or an area where it's hard to find comps, then the old-fashioned, the guideline of 6 months, of course, that's fine to use. You want to generally try to be similar in both the living area and the lot size. Sometimes if you're in a rural area, maybe you've got a house that is on, say, for example, 30 acres, and you may need to calculate your values based on the house and the acre of land maybe that it sits on, and calculate that value, and then calculate a value for the rest of the land, and then add those up in your presentation, and then determine who's the buyer likely going to be for that property. In special micro markets, you might want to stay within the same area, or even look at homes that are home sales, that is, that are 2 to 3 years old. An example again might be that mid-century modern style of home. It has a very particular kind of buyer, and you may not find another mid-century in that same neighborhood. You may have to go within the same township, and it might have been a year ago, or in this example that we have on the slide, you may have to go back a couple of years to really get a good idea of what homes were selling for. And we had already talked about, not really comparing a two-story to a ranch and vice versa. Finished basements are important to a lot of people. So you don't want to make a lot of adjustments. And so if you can find other comps that also have finished basements, I would suggest that you would use those before you would look at comps that do not have finished basements, and likewise with pools. Now, this is some advice I was given a long time ago when going into a property, and you can see whether they've deferred their maintenance. And usually it's effective to tell them that if an owner that is not putting at least 1% of the value of their property back into the property on an annual basis, now granted that's an average, but that can involve everything from maintenance to upgrades in that, they'll end up paying for it eventually, either in a lower sales price or when it comes time to do the inspections for those buyers, they'll take the hit there. So that's, again, when I talk about that range, you may offer your seller a range, in its current condition, it's likely to sell around this end of the range. And if we could do some things that I'm suggesting to you, we could possibly get you up to this end of the range. So it's important to, encourage your sellers to keep up on that maintenance after you've sold houses with clients. Following up with them time to time with market updates and tips and things like that are helpful, to where if they do sell their house again in the next 7 to 10 years, you've already been their trusted partner and real estate advice and so forth, and you can help them to have avoided, not taking care of their property and then that be reflective in the value. Or, maybe they've over improved their property, like that house that I mentioned earlier in the presentation in Franklin Township. There comes a time where they can put too much into the property, and that law of diminishing returns is such that they just won't get their investment back. So in determining the highest and best use, again, what's physically possible with the property, if we're down in the Fountain Square area, the areas around there where houses for a while now have been torn down and they've built brand new, beautiful houses selling in the 400 plus thousand price range, what is the highest and best use for that particular property? Also, what's legally permissible? If somebody tells you, oh yeah, I want to operate this business or that business out of my home, you may want to do some investigating, or help them rather do some investigating before they would make an offer on that property. So when you are representing the seller, you also want to determine, well, what is maybe the zoning on that property, and does that equate to a higher value? What's economically feasible? In those days, and I hate to keep mentioning Fountain Square all the time, but when you were able to buy a tear down for $20,000 and now it's $120,000, and then you consider what it would cost to build a new house, do you get to a point where you've overinvested? And that's actually what's happened with Two Chicks and a Hammer, or I guess now it's called Good Bones, but they've gotten priced out of Fountain Square. They've had to go a little further out to still get a value that makes sense for them to go in and do a renovation, or for them to go in and tear down and start from scratch. And then what's maximally productive, and then that MIBOR case study about suing the listing broker. I already mentioned that earlier. But zoning is very important in determining the highest and best value. A lot of downtown properties on the corner, usually every house on a corner, and sometimes the next one in from that, may have actually a commercial zoning for a limited type of commercial activity. So look and see what the zoning is showing for that property. All Fannie Mae really requires, aside from, like I said earlier, not using specific dollar amounts across the board for adjusting on properties, would be that the comp that you use really needs to appeal to the same set of buyers that the subject property would. If you know that that person is likely going to buy that property, let's say it's a mid-century modern once again, it's going to be a special kind of buyer that's going to want to buy that property. And so you wouldn't necessarily comp that out to a two-story that looks like, it's from the Cleavers or something like that. You want to make sure that it's truly a property that is going to be truly comparable. Again, same neighborhood or competing neighborhood when it's unavoidable. And sometimes there will be non-comparable properties in the same neighborhood that have to be used, but I would say that's really, really rare. And so, try to avoid that if at all possible. Now, one of the issues a lot of appraisers have brought up is that they can run a search in the MLS and 5 minutes later do the exact same search with the exact same criteria and get one more or sometimes one less house pop up than what they got the first time. And so sometimes you can have information on there that makes no sense why that would happen that way, but maybe you want to run the search a couple of times. Maybe a house is showing as pending when it really has closed. MIBOR now has fines for agents if they're not updating the status within a reasonable period of time. So hopefully those days are really over with inaccurate information, but still you might want to check it out. Maybe it's showing that it expired, but it's really pending. So sometimes just a phone call to those agents is called for. If it's a non-market driven sale, a foreclosure, maybe a divorce where they have to sell, an estate where the people just want to get it off their hands so that they can close out probate, those will generally not give you as good of an idea of the true value because there were circumstances involved behind that. So sometimes, again, a call to the agent to find out if just something looks like, gosh, I can't believe it sold for that little, there has to be something wrong. And you call and they say, oh yeah, the crawl space was flooded out and they're going to have to put $15,000 into that. And so we just took a lower price or what have you. So doing a little research and being a detective sometimes is part of the job. We really talked about Fountain Square enough, I think. Garfield Park is another area where we had a house I had buyers for, and they had so many offers that I think that they went over the listing price by about $45,000 in Garfield Park of all places. And so just understanding that dynamic down there is, or in any area for that matter, is important when you're determining value. If there are no photos in the comps that you're trying to use, that is a real detriment, because that's also how appraisers get their information. The house is closed on those comps, so they can't go through and tour the properties. They really rely on the photos. And unfortunately, for some reason, some agents are starting to take down their photos after they've closed out the sale. And I just think that is not a true cooperative kind of nature in our industry, that at the very least we should leave them up for 6 more months before they want to erase those pictures, just for the sake of other agents who are doing CMAs, or for appraisers in those neighborhoods that are needing to do appraisals. They need to see those pictures. And then sometimes personal property was really included in the sale and can skew the price. I know that, you're not really supposed to say, well, I'll give you your price if you also give me your riding lawnmower and all your furniture that goes around the pool and things like that. But I'm sure it happens. And sometimes the appraisers will come in with the value that the people were looking for. But was the house really worth that, or was it only worth that to the buyers anyway, to the market, because the seller was including all those extra things? So again, your MLS is going to be your biggest brand in our area. It's the BLC, the Broker Listing Cooperative. Accessing public records will be important from time to time. You may ask your sellers if they've got a copy of their old appraisal, because generally those measurements the appraisers took are going to be more accurate than the assessor's measurements. So I would maybe encourage you to look at that, and you'll oftentimes find where the house is actually bigger, sometimes smaller, but oftentimes bigger than what the assessor showed. RPR, and there's a whole class that you can take through NAR's offering of the RPR, has tools and resources for you showing the trends in the area. It is fed by our local MLS, so it is much more accurate than, say, Zillow's Z estimate would be. But if you want to take a class on that bottom bullet point, that's where you can go to on NAR's site and take that class on how to utilize that tool. Automated valuation modules, those would be things like Zillow and things of that nature. That they don't really have access to a lot of information. Sometimes it's guesswork. Sometimes they're pulling from the tax record. And so they even show their accuracy level. They already admit that it's pretty low. Realtor valuation models, those would be like the RPR that we just mentioned a moment ago. We have a great tool that we offer you, the buy side program, that you can send out to prospects. It is going to give them an automated valuation model from 3 different sites. And I don't know if Christy's already taught you about that, but I'm sure you'll learn it soon. I think it's a great tool. It's fun. It's interesting. And then it does let the person that you're sending it to know that, hey, for a true apples to apples comparison, just contact me and I'll do an actual full out CMA for you. But it's sort of fun because it shows you a low, medium, and high value. And it's a conversation starter for sure. And it has some other bells and whistles to it that can be helpful to you. So definitely check that out. Any questions so far that have come up, Christy? Any others?
Let me look. Nope, we look good, and the sound is way better. So thank you for making that switch.
Okay, good. Do you think I should backtrack on any of those earlier slides when we get to the end to cover them? Anything that didn't come through very well?
I think we'll be okay, but if anyone wants to go back and cover anything, just let us know if you have a question on it and we can revisit.
And Chrissy, you're sending them the PowerPoint, right, too? So if they go through the slides, if there's any questions, guys, always feel free to reach out to me. It's jim.anthony@talktotucker.com. So let's get into making adjustments. You want to be sure that any adjustment that you make truly represents the market. You don't want to make an adjustment just because you think that's going to make the seller happy. The appraisers want to see your purchase agreement, and that's usually why they have asked for it. They're looking in there for any maybe seller concessions that were made. Maybe you gave $3,000 to the buyers on that comp to go towards their closing costs. Well, they're really going to look at the net then value of that house based on those kinds of adjustments. For cost-based adjustments, there's a great report. If you Google cost versus value, it gives you regions of the country, and it tells you on low, medium, and high kinds of renovations what they're likely to recap from that investment. So for example, maybe they put in X number of dollars on a mid-range kind of kitchen upgrade, and it might then indicate in the Midwest here that they could perhaps get 60% of that back, just as an example. So that's a report that you could look at. And if a seller is just sure that the upgrades that they have done are probably more valuable than you think, then refer them to the same source or print it out and say, hey, generally in this particular geographic area, this is what you can expect to get from what you invested in your kitchen. And so that's why I'm reflecting that percentage in my estimations as well. Buyers in certain price points have expectations in those price points. If you were to buy a house in Florida, you pretty much expect that it's going to have an air conditioning system. If it doesn't, you're probably going to make an adjustment for the full value of an air conditioning system. Here in our area, yeah, we do have humidity in the summertime, and sometimes it can be unbearable, but is an air conditioner a requirement, a necessity? Not necessarily. So you wouldn't necessarily make a full cost valuation adjustment for an air conditioning system, but it just depends. So keep those kinds of things in mind, that that's something that you want to consider also. I enjoy talking with appraisers. I can't tell you how many times they've reached out to me to ask a question. And in a little bit, we'll get into information packets that we put together for the appraiser to take with them and why we do that. So, you want to understand that the sellers have an idea in their minds what they have done to the house, what it's worth. Buyers have an idea in their mind of what they're willing to pay for a particular kind of renovation. And so you're just going to want to use your market experience or talk with some of your peers in your office, or even like I've said, I've reached out to appraisers before. As a matter of fact, Mark Ratterman of the Indiana Appraisal Institute that helped put this PowerPoint together, a lot of this information comes from him directly. And I've reached out to him multiple times when I've had a particular question or needed some kind of assistance. He's been right there to help. And later on, I'll give you his contact information. And then you don't want to do double dipping. We really should not be adjusting for the square footage and for a difference in, say, the number of rooms. It's either one or the other, and you just have to figure out what is worth more. Is the fact that it has 5 bedrooms rather than the comp next door that has 4, is that more of a difference in value, or is the square footage of that room more valuable? So you have to make that adjustment call, but you just don't want to do both. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, if a subject property and a comp are are less than 20% different in the square footage of the living areas, generally you probably won't be making any kind of an adjustment for that square footage unless you're talking about a real small house like a bungalow. You know, some of those small 8, 9, 100 square feet, 1,000 square feet bungalows, you know, every square foot's going to definitely make a difference in that. We talked a little bit about, you know, large lot properties versus small lots. Maybe you would take the land out and calculate its value separately from the parcel that the house is actually sitting on. And then, and you find this a lot in downtown properties, or properties in neighborhoods. As we go concentrically out from downtown Indianapolis, you notice houses that were the oldest are downtown, and then you get out and you're seeing houses in the 40s in the circle outside of that, and then the 50s and the 60s and then the 70s. If you are ever having to compare properties that have age differences in them, you will likely make an adjustment for those age differences. And usually that's because they've probably had differences in the materials that were used inside. Or maybe one of those older houses has had a lot of updates to it, whereas the house that's 20 or 30 years newer hasn't yet had updates to it. But never make an adjustment just to please the seller. Always look at the market and then make them look at the market too, and then explain why you have adjusted the way you've adjusted. So we won't take the time today to go to this YouTube video, but this is a great resource for you to use where you can go in and compare comparables, how you would maybe add categories and things like that you want to adjust for that aren't necessarily in MyBoar's automated or existing list of resources that a house or a property might have. And you might want to add that and manually make some adjustments. So let's say that you've got the listing now and you've got a buyer and you want to make sure that the appraiser that comes out is going to really be close to what your estimation of the value was. And you want to make sure that you get a fair appraisal. The new rules that appraisers are under, unfortunately, do not guarantee accuracy. And this story that I tell, we had the buyer for a house that was being flipped in Irvington. Because it had been less than 6 months between the time the flippers had bought it and when they were getting into contract with us, not when we were closing with us, but when they were getting in contract with us, and because our buyer was getting an FHA mortgage, it required 2 appraisals. The first appraisal came in just fine. It came in exactly at the amount that we had the agreement for. The second appraisal came in $25,000 less than the first appraisal. And we were thinking, how is that even possible? In this day and age where appraisals are supposed to be so formulaic, how could 2 appraisers be so different in their valuation? And so we disputed it. We tried to get the other appraiser to at least make some kind of concession for the difference between what the first appraiser was coming in at, what we had come in at with our own comps. But the appraiser really, he did budge about $5,000, but that still meant we were off by $20,000. And the deal would have died, except for the fact that our buyer, even though he's frustrated, stuck in, went ahead and went with another lender to get an insured conventional loan where he was going to put 5% down instead of the 3.5% of an FHA. But it meant having another appraisal. And that one came in just fine, just like the first appraisal did. And so even though you've done diligent work, even though you've put time and attention into trying to come up with the most appropriate value, and other appraisers would likely support what you just said, there could be a time where you get something like this. One more example that is relatively newer is a relocation that we were having downtown. Because this relocation was involving a buyout, the relocation company will usually require that 2 appraisers go out and also do actual appraisals on the property. And if they're off by a certain amount, they'll actually have a third appraiser come out. And that's exactly what happened. We had 3 appraisals. They were off in value from like $530-some thousand of value up to $625,000 in value between the 3 of them. Each one of them had measured the house differently, so they were off on even their measurements. And you're thinking to yourself, "Oh my gosh, this is just crazy." But it's going to be a situation where you'll find it helpful to put together information packets, and we'll talk about that, like I said. A lot of these appraisers are working under really tight schedules. They've been hired by appraisal management companies that are sort of a middleman for a lot of these lenders, or for the relocation companies in our case. And so they're not making even as much because that middleman is taking some of that money for their part in the transaction. And like I mentioned before, sometimes they miss things. And so if you're providing something that shows the comps that you use, they don't want to see your CMA, but if you do provide your comps and anything else that maybe they missed, that is helpful to them. And if you can do it up front before they've even done their calculation, that's even better. And that leads us into this next slide, the appraiser information packets. I usually type up an information packet. I will send it to them because as a listing broker, I know who the appraiser is because they had to schedule the appointment to do the appraisal through showing time. And so, of course, I then see their name, their contact information, and so forth. So I usually email it to them, but I leave a physical copy in the house too. And usually it's got a bullet point list of all the home's best features and upgrades. I usually do it in reverse chronological order from the most recent and even what they spent on those upgrades all the way down. Any neighborhood information that they need to know about, the comps that I used with notes in the margins about those comps. And then I leave that for them in a packet. If they are super busy and they don't necessarily have as much time on their hands to do as thorough of a job as we would hope that they would do, having this information at their fingertips would be helpful to them. And you have to be a detective. Do you know about some of the circumstances about a particular sale that happened? Was it a divorce or a job relocation? One MLS in the downtown area, when we were talking about these 3 appraisals, said that the seller was out of the country, lived out of the country, and they even called it a fire sale in the agent-to-agent remarks. And so we showed that to all 3 of the appraisals. Said, why would you use this comp when they already admitted that it was a fire sale? It's not really reflective of the other sales in the area. Is the listing still showing as pending when it really is closed? Is it expired when it was really sold? Trying to make sure that we've made sure that they have updated the status so that we know, if it has already sold and closed. And sometimes I've asked agents while they're pending, hey, would you mind telling me what the sale price actually is? And very seldom do they say, no, they're not comfortable with that until it actually closes. Usually they'll go ahead and tell me, and then I can pass that on too. It's important to be proactive. It's important to do most of this legwork for the appraiser before they do the report, because after they've done it and after they've turned it in to the lender, it's a little too late. If they start to make changes after they've turned it in, they start to open themselves up to scrutiny by Fannie Mae and so forth, and they're monitored for that. And all of those appraisals, go into a database. And Fannie Mae's database is looking for outliers. It's looking for things that don't seem to make sense. And if these appraisers get dinged, they could actually lose the ability to do appraisals. And so this is their livelihood. They don't want to do that. So they may, be overly conservative. But if they've got documentation to support what they're doing, and if you've helped them with that, many times things come out very favorably to you. You want to include any MLS photos, tax pages, list of features, any relevant hidden details about the property. One time we had a house on a pretty large lot, but one side of the lot backed up to a golf course, and the other had a creek running all the way through it. And it was a pretty wide creek too. And on the day the appraisal was done, it was raining. And when we got the appraisal back, the appraiser had must have just gone in and out of the house and not walked to the property, but didn't realize that property had additional value because of this creek and because of the access to the golf course. And that was early on in my career. That was the one of the big lessons that I learned, that, hey, I need to either be meeting the appraiser out there and helping them understand the actual property, or I need to have an appraisal information packet that has maybe a survey of the land, or has bullet points that talk about these things so that they're not missing details. And then if an appraisal does come in low, you just have to decide with the seller, what does the seller want to do? Do they want to try to renegotiate? Do they maybe want to take some things off the table? Maybe they were going to give the buyer some closing costs, but now because the values come in low, we want to renegotiate that. Do they feel like there's just something very wrong, like in that Irvington flip that I was mentioning, and they just want to walk away? Or should we try something else, like going through a different lender? You can look through the appraisals and try to find out where could they have missed something. And so back to our example where all three of those downtown appraisers on that reload all had different size valuations on their measurements for the property. Well, that was one thing that we addressed was, well, hey, here's the measurements, and everybody's coming up with a different size measurement. So here's what we've got. Could there have been better comps that were used, something that maybe they didn't pull up, or something that they just weren't aware of? And can you include that in your appeal? And then because the appraiser has turned that in to the bank, you're really not supposed to be talking directly to the appraiser anymore. You can do it before they do it, but afterwards, you really need to be dealing directly with the lender. And the best way to do that is putting your findings, your supporting documentation in a letter or email explaining those differences, and turn that in. And then they'll deal with the appraiser in trying to see about appealing that. When you're reviewing appraisal, number one, did it identify the subject property correctly? An example we had on that is we had a house and 4 additional lots that were being sold. And even though the purchase agreement showed the lots correctly, the appraiser left off one of the lots. And then we had to dispute, well, that lot obviously is worth some money, and if you add that in, then you're coming up at the value that we were at. And so that was an example of appeal where we looked at and found out that the appraiser had missed one of the lots. The appraisal needs to describe the scope of the appraiser's work, as well as who they're actually working for. Is it the lender? Yes, usually it is. What's the intended use of the report? Does it have the effective date that they did the work? Does it truly and accurately describe the relevant characteristics of the property? Like, for example, did they miss that there was a creek on the property, or that it backs up to a golf course? Did they identify the methods that they used? Like maybe they used a cost approach or a sales approach. And then did it accurately describe the neighborhood and the market conditions? Now, we talked about how, you are able to talk with an appraiser. You are, before they turn in their report. The only thing that Indiana code says is that you should not try to improperly influence that appraiser. You shouldn't unduly influence the appraiser or try to coerce them or anything like that, because there is a significant fine if it's ever found that you do. So I would just tell you to, if you can be proactive and try to do as much of your legwork with them before they do the report, like giving them an appraisal information packet, it's very helpful. Some additional tips, we're always monitoring the market, so we're on top of how things change and how quickly they change. That's one of the great things about how valuable we are as real estate agents, and that's because we're full-time into this. This is our livelihood, it's our career, and so we want to be the trusted source of information for people. And then educating our clients is a big important component of that. A lot of times they think they know more about the market than they do. They very seldom sell a house over the course of their lifetime. You're going to be doing it where you're having a couple closings a week sometimes. So you know the business inside and out, or you soon will. And that has a value to it. And then you should be keeping your CMAs and your broker price opinions for the same amount of time that you keep all of your other real estate documents. Sometimes people will have saved their CMA on MyBor, where you can create, they have the template on there for you, but you shouldn't then go in and just erase that after the transaction is over with. You want to keep that in there, so if you ever have to go back on it, you've got that. There are rules that the appraisers have to be in compliance with, and that is that link that you're seeing here. And like I said, Chrissy will be sending you the actual PowerPoint presentation. And then Mark Ratterman, great guy from the Indiana Appraisal Institute. He has been one of their instructors for many years, and right now sits on their ethics board. So any kind of reviews, things like that, he is privy to. And he's served on a lot of MyBor committees. I've served on some with him. And so I don't try to ever overdo it, but over the course of my career, there've probably been a handful of times that I've reached out to him and said, you know, this just doesn't look right. What do you think? And gotten some perspective from him on that. Also, Mark McCallum, he was another appraiser who helped with this. And so I want to thank him as well. I think having this information that has come from the appraiser's standpoint and really trying to model ourselves and how we approach a CMA by following some of those same guidelines that appraisers follow should help us to try to be as close to the appraisal when it's done as at all possible. So any questions?
I don't see that any have come in that we haven't already addressed. So thank you for sharing this afternoon, Jim, and bearing with us during the crazy audio situation.
Well, yeah, it's much more fun, you guys, when we can all be in the same room together. It's much more dynamic. So I just appreciate that you're getting to do this, because there's so many resources that Christy and her team have put together for you. And once we're able to start doing live classes, that's fun. But all the online options that you have to you right now, just you could spend some of every day building your skill set and sharpening those skills by utilizing the many great options that she and her team have. So I encourage you to make that a part of every day, especially in these early days when you're building up business and you've got some time on your hands. Make that a part of every day to, investigate these things and learn about these things. And just one last time, I just wanted to mention, if I can ever be of help to you, feel free to reach out to me at any time, jim.anthony@talktotucker.com. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Have a great rest of your day.